Hello and welcome. And this is one of my 60 conversations to celebrate my 60th birthday. And this morning I have the delight and pleasure of the lovely Caroline Hughes here. I don't know Caroline very well. We have had the joy of meeting in person because Caroline was one of the amazing speakers at the Birmingham event that happened, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? Not even that, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just we're a week back. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And what an impactful event that was. And Caroline's talk really had me up dancing. I was absolutely dancing with total abandonment and just having a great time. You talked about music and the impact of where you were when something happened, particularly with a musical event. And yeah, I mean, every single one of the talks I think were hugely impactful. And yes, I particularly remember the dancing when you talked about the Irish music. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Caroline,
Thank you, Deborah.
Oh, you're welcome. Will you tell us just a little bit about who you are, and let's dive in and see what inspiration comes today.
Yeah, well, firstly, I feel really honoured, Deborah, to be one of your 60. Are you 60 for tea? Your 60 conversations, because we met so briefly in Birmingham, and I was just really deeply moved to see you dancing with abandonment. You know, I really saw your inner teenager, you know, get channeled.
I did not know I was being filmed.
I know. But isn't that what they say? You know, we should dance like there's nobody looking. Isn't that it? You know,
Yeah.
And so thank you, firstly, and yeah, let me answer your question a little bit about me. I'm an Irish national. I live here in Dublin in Ireland, but I always consider myself a global citizen because, kind of in my heart and in my mind, what matters most to me is when, you know, people come together of all different nationalities, creeds, belief systems, because I think together we can really, really have a very different type of conversation than if we're typically surrounded by people we know and we love, and in communities that we, you know, belong in, and we can finish each other's sentences. I think that's always fabulous. But actually, I've been very blessed that through my career, I've worked internationally, I've worked with diverse teams and organizations and led global functions and teams. And I've always been deeply impacted by that extra kind of X factor that happens when people come together and bring their differences and celebrate our similarities. And so a lot of the work that I do, Deborah, is in big organizations, because that's my background. I was a global director in a Fortune 500 company before I set up Conscious Leaders in 2020. And I set it up after having quite a significant burnout. And the work that I've been doing really since has been with leaders and their teams who are developing big transformations, either in their lives at a personal level or in their organizations. And how do you bring people together along a vision that you are creating or that you're co-creating in your organization? And you know, the thing that I really learned, and as I step back, both in my own leadership journey and as I work kind of with teams kind of through this particular part of the journey, is, you know, very often it's our past experience that gets in the way of our future potential, right? It's the stories we tell each other about what went wrong before and why it couldn't possibly work in the future. And kind of my favorite place to stand is in, you know, in that possibility of, yeah, but what if we could clean out what gets in the way, the disempowering stories, the old belief systems, and actually work towards kind of almost a non-negotiable future that at this moment might feel impossible, but actually with the right people around us, we can actually do it. Because everything we have in our lives, you know, if we look around your room, the same as I look around my room, it exists because somebody thought they could do it. That's the TV, that's the phone, that's the table I'm sitting at, that's the beautiful painting behind you. And so why couldn't that be possible when we're dealing with groups of people that come together to do something great?
I just love that. I got tingles when you were saying about if we could just stop listening to the thinking that keeps us small and keeps us believing that not me, you know, what would be possible. And that has definitely been my exploration in a very, and one of the reasons, you know, it's so good to speak to you is because I am about as far away from a global leader in the way that you talk as it's probably possible to me to be. You know, I was a stay-at-home mom. And so definitely when I wanted to create a business, my stories were, you've got no background. You know, I would talk to people like you who say, oh yeah, I was in corporate. You know, I was like, what even does corporate mean? I don't even know what that means. You know, how can this?
Me neither.
This is what I love. This is exactly what you're talking about. When you actually sit down and have a conversation with people, and all of these things that make us feel as if somehow we are inadequate or not enough. It's like when you just clear that away. When you spoke at the event and you talked about being in your bedroom with your friends and listening to music, I'm like, yeah, I've been in my bedroom with a group of girls and doing our hair and, you know, trying clothes on and doing and listening to music in the background and been really impacted. I was like, I'm not that different from you. And yet these stories that we make up, and like you say, if people have a different accent to us, a different color of skin to us, a different sex to us, a different sexual orientation to us, a different, any kind of, in whatever way, for whatever reason, a different perspective or experience, we just make up these stories. Like, what happens if we stop doing that and find those places where we are the same? What is possible? And that is what excites me.
Yeah, yeah. Because I guess I'm not sure it's possible to not make up stories. I'm not sure that's. I mean, in a world of possibility, is that a possibility, right? But maybe where I stand, and this is just today, and this is what, June 2024. We could talk June 2025, and I may stand somewhere differently, Deborah, right? Is, well, if we're going to make up stories, why not make up ones that are in our favor, right? Why not make up the stories that creates and everybody wins rather than a race to the bottom of how everybody could potentially lose? And so I don't necessarily challenge myself to have no story.
Yeah.
But I'm more in the, you know, if I'm going to pick one, let me pick a good one.
Yes.
Let me pick a story that shows a way forward rather than a way backward, or a way to come together rather than a way to divide. Because, you know, our worlds may be different, but I imagine in your work and in your contribution as a mum to your family, you've had to navigate exactly the same type of situations as I've had.
I would expect so, yes.
And it might have been to be around the dinner table at a certain time on a certain day. Or it might have been to be home safe and well by a certain moment, right? Or to do a certain amount of study in order to watch sport on TV, or right, whatever negotiation. Because we're always, no matter what our walk of life, we're always being something to someone. And then we kind of explore, well, who are we being for ourselves?
I think that is a huge exploration as well, isn't it? Who are we being to and for ourselves? Because I can see that that was very neglected by me, and I see that in a lot of women particularly, and maybe in a different way for men. But I feel like, yeah, it's very, very easy to be all things to all people and not show up for ourselves very much at all.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely a lesson that I learned very sharply in my experience of burnout in 2019, 2020, you know, where I identified so much with what it meant to lead my team and deliver my projects or whatever the different demands that I had on me at that time. And I started to make trade-offs. You know, I traded my weekend for sleep and rest. in order to be able to do what I needed to do at work during the week. But that also meant I traded some of my friendships. I traded off some of the routines that would have maybe helped me be in a more healthier balance. I took on really big physical, demanding activities like going to Base Camp Everest or climbing Kilimanjaro or Tubakal in North Africa, wherever else. I can't remember the full list at this point, right? Because my identification was with success equals doing this job in this way.
Yeah.
Putting big, significant personal challenges on the map so that I would attend to my physical fitness, because my identification with work was so strong. It needed something of an equal greatness, an equal challenge to even match that. And so being out for dinner with friends, for example, was something I might have been very willing to sacrifice so that I could meet one of those two goals, until ultimately, in my case, my body called in the tab and said, maybe it's time to reevaluate here. And I sometimes feel in these conversations that the conversation about the body can be absent.
Yes.
And, you know, whilst our mind is this very powerful meaning-making machine, and we can, you know, we can convince ourselves of anything, can't we? You know, right? What I'm discovering, and this is an ongoing, you know, that actually paying attention to our bodies, to our physical energy, and really being aware of what's available to us. And when do we need to, you know, push harder, go softer, so that we have, you know, a very consistent energy profile.
Yes.
And I don't mean energetic. I mean as in the energy we need, the fuel in the tank, in the physical tank of the body, to take us through our day, our month, our year, our whatever it is that we need to do.
I love how much more aware it feels to me as societies, how much more we are becoming aware of the mind-body connection. And, you know, we get, to me, I can really see, I get, it's like both of those things speak to me. And if I neglect either of them, if I don't attend to it, if I neglect either of them, you know, if I don't feel very well and I know I need to rest, if I just think, no, I can push through and I'm not going to take any notice of that, it's like, not a good idea. My eldest daughter is about to have a baby, and her due date is the 6th of June. So, and I'm waiting. Yeah, I've literally got my phone here. I'm waiting for the phone call.
Brilliant.
And nothing's happening yet, but I know, like, a lot of our conversations have been about how much when we're doing something like having a baby, something like that, we have to learn so much trust in our bodies. And I have watched, you know, over my lifetime, and as I said, a huge thing for me was being a mom and my children, and seeing how much for a period of time there, it felt like we were being taught to not listen to our own bodies, that a doctor, something or someone out here would know better than our own instincts about what was going on. And definitely for me, something like childbirth is definitely one of those times. And I know my daughter and I have had some amazing conversations about trust your body. Your body was built to do this. Lean in and trust what you know to be true above all else. And I think that, you know, when you talk about burnout, I guess how that happens is when we completely stop doing that. We don't listen into that at all. And we see that all over the place in all sorts of ways, don't we, how it comes about. But,
definitely. Yeah. You know, I love, well, firstly, I'm wishing all the very best to your daughter and your new grandbaby about to enter the world. How amazing. Amazing. What an amazing gift to have on the way. So yeah, deep congratulations, Deborah. And you know, it's I remember reading this book called The Body Keeps the Score, by a guy called Ralph DeKosh, and he talks about what gets stored, at a cellular level in the body. But I think what you're pointing to is something deeper. It's this deep body wisdom that's available. That, isn't it amazing? Now, I'm not a parent and I've never had any children. But I remember being present at my niece's birth because she arrived a couple of weeks early because she was dying to see me. And I really remember, I was in the father's waiting room while my sister and brother-in-law were in the delivery room, and the excitement of the moment, firstly. And then seeing my niece Kira at like about 20 minutes old, and how just, perfect, first of all, she was, and she still is, as indeed are the rest of my nephews and my niece. And what really stayed with me was, I remember one of the doctors coming in the next morning, and he picked her up, just like straight in front of her, and straight away her legs made the movement of walking. Straight away.
Yeah.
And I still remember that because he said, yes, this is normal. Like, she looked like she was cycling on a bike without a bike, right? And it was phenomenal. I never experienced anything like this before. I'd never been present, this close to birth. It's only one time so far in my life that it's happened. And and he said, yes, we know to walk. We know how to walk from the moment we're born. And that he essentially said, she'll forget now until she's ready to walk, right? And I thought, and I still think, isn't that an amazing like symbolism for how we really go through life? That there's so many things our bodies know to do that our heads haven't caught up with, firstly.
Yeah.
And then secondly, this notion of being ready, right? Are we ever ready? Do we even, right? Do we even need to be ready? And I guess this is part of what I was pointing to in my speech last weekend, like taking the decision to make a significant impact in a moment. That's really, I think that's actually our job.
Yes.
I think the being ready and the being good enough, that's all the surround sound, right? That we create, back to your opening statement around our stories, right? But choosing to make significant impact in a moment by taking a stand, by having a conversation, by saying no. We don't even have to be ready for those moments, because
we were,
as I'm sure your daughter
that potential.
Exactly. It's built in, right?
Yes.
And again, I feel a little out of my depth here, but I'm going to just continue the parental analogy. I mean, any of my friends who've become parents, and there's such, excitement in the run up to the birth, and then 3 weeks later you meet them and holy hell has broken loose in their lives. Deprived, and there's so many things they didn't think about. There's this little human, literally, whose life for this moment kind of depends on you doing your best.
Yeah.
And I always look at that, and and I would say I work with leaders, and we often come back to this conversation of, are you ever ready for anything? When you think of what our parents did to raise us, and when we think of what parents do for children, and you're much more fluent in this, Deborah, than I. So why would we think we have to be ready for something when actually in our biggest chapters in life, we get on with it. We take our decisions. We do what we've got to do.
I love that. I love that. There is something so profound in that. And it, again, like you say, it is the crazy stories that we believe. And this is the point. Yes, we have something like a human life that is just completely dependent on us, and it's like, well, I have no choice. I have to make a stand for this. I have to just do my best in this moment.
Yes.
And sometimes our best can be woefully inadequate, but somehow, but equally, when you look when you look at how many babies are born and how many of us survive to adulthood, we don't do so bad at it, really, do we? It's pretty. We've got a pretty good record of you know, I've had 3 children, and all 3 of my children are adults, and it's like, wow, yes, in those moments. And I absolutely think these kinds of conversations that are like, there is something there to lean into. That is the thing that I am seeing more and more and more and more. It's like we don't have to be ready. We don't have to be prepared. We don't have to know everything. We don't have to know how this is, whatever it is. We don't have to know how this is going to turn out. It is almost that it is just the courage to have a go. And if we step into it and have a go, something will happen, something will move, something will change, and then we will know what to do next, the next step.
That's it, you know. There's somebody, and you may know who this is, Deborah, the name escapes me, you know, talks about courage not being the absence of fear.
Yeah, I can't.
But actually the ability to take action in the fear, that is courage. You know, and I want to go back to something you said, if I may. Is that okay? I want to just pick up something that you said.
Totally.
You know, you said that we're doing our best, even if it turns out to be inadequate. And I would just love to just invite you to see that regardless of how it turns out, it was your best in that moment. That's what was available. And we look at it on the 4th of June, 2024, with different knowledge, with, you know, the benefit of hindsight, with everything we know and learned in between.
Yeah.
But if that was what was available,
yes,
in that moment, well, then actually this narrative of inadequate kind of begins to loosen its grip.
My dad shared something with me many, many years ago along those lines, which has really, really stuck with me. And he said, with what you knew in that moment, you did the best that you could do. And if you were to go back to that moment and again, only know what you knew in that moment, you would just do the same thing. And it's like we have, and like with, if we move forward, like you say, hindsight and knowing something different, a different perspective, a different state of mind, we're looking at it from somewhere different. It's very, very easy to judge or whatever it is we do.
Yes, it is a judgment. Yeah. You know, and this is very similar to the work that I do with teams, right? Where we look at what's getting in the way, and it's very often what will seem like a simple statement, you know, like the one that you made. I was doing my best, and it might have been inadequate. And this allows us an opening to go, well, according to whom? Right? According to whom? And I see this, you know, in the organizations I work in, where we then judge the actions of the past through today's information set.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes that's a really valuable thing to do, because that's how we move behavior forward, isn't it? Behavior that might have been appropriate 20 years ago, or even 2 years ago. In today's world, we can look at it and go, oh, we've got something to learn, and therefore do different as we go forward, right? But if we carry it in an unspoken way, it's what starts to get in the way of our listening for each other. It's what starts to get in the way of our relationships with each other, because we're holding a story that doesn't really serve us. It doesn't belong in the 2024 revised edition, right? We just carried it forward from version, 1.0, 2003.
Yeah.
We've forgotten to drop it, or we haven't given it some type of attention that it may need momentarily for it to be cleared.
Yeah, to have I guess it's the realization that we, like in speaking that out like I did, yeah, it's the realization that that's how I view some of my past. Oh, okay, what you did there wasn't quite good enough. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. And then create that. Whereas, again, if we go back to the stories, there was something when you were saying, yeah, I agree. I don't think we have the ability to have no story, and I don't think that would be much fun either, to have no story whatsoever. But very, very much it is, for me, what I am seeing in this is learning to use everything for myself and not against myself, and noticing when, and brilliant, however that notice comes about. I think the openness to just look there opens these this is what this conversation is about. It's like, okay, I am open to seeing this. What am I using against myself? Because I can, we're all we all do it. It's like,
Yes,
yeah,
we do.
there is always growth here. And it's like, okay, where can I see that? And it feels like, as I open to that as a possibility, these conversations happen. This, oh yeah, it's true. I do. I look back at my past, and I can see, exactly like you said, there is room to look at it and say, with what you know now, you could do something different. So when situations arise, you've got more to call on now. There is something you can do differently. But not look at it as a and I know, I can feel in me, and the weekend in Birmingham, there was actually something that happened on our journey down, a throwaway comment by the lady that I was with, that really hit me, and then was happening during the weekend, and actually that was a part of the dance that I was doing, just let this go. I realized how hard I had been judging myself in the past. It was, I was kind of thinking, yeah, my story was, I was in a very abusive relationship for over 20 years. And I realized how much I was like, yeah, you should have known better. Your children suffered because you should have known better. And realize, and continually being, well, it's not their fault, it's not, but still holding some fault, and I should have known better. And a lot of it, so much of it has gone, but just those little things, yeah, maybe it was inadequate. Well, what if what I knew at that time? And it's just, yeah, it opens up the possibility. Like when we look at a newborn child, they just come into the world, an absolute bundle of total possibility. And we never lose that. We don't lose that. We just collect these stories that can be unhelpful. But like you said, if we are going to create a story, use everything for us, not against us, against ourselves.
Yeah. And and in those moments where, like what you experienced on the train, like that's an invitation, isn't it? Really, that's an invitation to say, okay, what is there that I need to reconcile, right? Whenever that might be. And I actually kind of really love that word, because that's about reconciliation, reconciling with ourselves, so that we can let it go. We can be with ourselves in compassion in those moments. Because I know when I have some of those triggers, my go-to can be to be very harsh. Oh, I should have known that, and do all this work and still that happens. Oh, right. And I can get there actually with great speed now, right? But actually I can also get myself out with great speed.
Yes.
And I sometimes say, when we kind of look at the the path through our own work, you know, to really get honest with ourselves about where we're at in life. And it's a little bit like, you know, the Hollywood fairy tale ending, isn't it? We want to be one with ourselves and walk through the world, you know, floating in a sea of zen, unmovable by, you know, anything external or internal, you know, and this constant, at least that was my kind of thinking, you know, say years ago, 15 years ago, when I really started really owning, I suppose, my own personal development path. But actually, kind of the further down I go, I kind of have kind of began to maybe just articulate it differently or experience it differently. And it's not so much about the floating on a cloud of Zen, like, you know, amazingness, you know, umming all of the time or whatever it is. It's actually more for me that when the triggers come, as they do, actually frequency and intensity can be very different. So something might go deep in for me. That really triggered in a session last week that I was having with a breath worker that I was working with, or that she was working with me. I was her client. And it was so sharp and so deep. And all the old stuff just came tumbling out, to escape, the want to go away, the feeling of not being safe, straight up. But actually, 10 minutes later, as she kept talking, I was back.
Yeah.
And that need that felt so real and so deep. And that's only this day last week, Wednesday of last week. Yeah, today's on Tuesday, right? It hit. She invited me to stay in the trigger and stay with that feeling of the feeling unsafe and all that was coming up around it, to a point where it wasn't gone, but I could hear her.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see that was the trigger talking. And we could go, and I could do my session feeling very safe and held and surrender to the work that I needed to do because of that very trigger in that moment. Because that was our real work.
Mm.
And so this is kind of how I start to see it now, that actually it's catching, like you had that moment on the train and it caught you, like I had last Wednesday in that session, and it really caught me raw and deep. But actually, stay in it, stay with it, have a conversation, come to a point where actually, okay, I can go here now. In my case, I was there as a client, so I could actually honor the trigger and explore it and do some integration around it, right? And so frequency intensity seems to shift as I deepen my own work, as I clear out my own personal closet of stories, disempowering beliefs, and things that remind me of things that have nothing got to do with it, right? I'm just the same as everybody else in that regard, right? And I think there's something in that. And I find there's a kindness for myself in that lowers the volume of, I should have this sorted by now, to, okay, we're back here again. Oops. Yeah. And then it doesn't take so long to return. And then it might be a long time again until that who knows, right? Where might be a long time before that happens again, right? Because frequency intensity kind of shifts and changes as we deepen the work, as we really sit in and with the discomfort sometimes that comes up when we really become more, I just call it self-aware. You can call it any teaching you like, right? I just feel this is about being aware of what's really happening, who's driving the bus at any given moment as we navigate our way through life. Is it 6-year-old me? Is it 11-year-old me? Is it 48-year-old me? Who is it, right? It's 70-year-old me saying, no, we're going here and I don't care that you haven't caught up yet, right? But actually, this is the direction that life has taken, right? This is what we're living into. We're living into a future that we're actively, proactively creating as being different. So sometimes 55-year-old me needs to take the bus, right? And she needs to drive because actually she's got this. I've got to figure out how to keep all the kids back in the back, right? Join her and looking out the window and saying, okay, I kind of like where you're going here. Let me just step in with you.
I think life is so generous with us when we have the courage and say, right, okay, I want this to be different and I'm prepared to look. I think it's never, like you say, the fears that we have that we're going to, we have to hold on to something, or we have to protect something, or we have to do the fear that we have of what might happen if we let go and lean in to this behind life that is so amazing and so generous. But it is like, actually, if something is coming up in that way, my experience has been, if I am prepared to lean into that and allow that to be whatever it is, it's like we have a mechanism within us that is self-cleaning and self-clearing if we will allow it. It is only us, our resistance to that. Like you say, if something comes up that feels fearful or we feel unsafe, and that is my experience too. You know, it comes up and there's this terrible fear of, I'm stupid, I'm not safe, something bad's gonna happen, whatever, you know, those kinds of sensations. And it's like, okay, if we can drop the resistance to that and lean into that, it's like it's a self-cleaning thing that happens. And it is exactly, I remember years ago someone talking about physical fitness, actually, but just talking about fitness, and they said it's not that you won't get out of breath, but it is how quickly will you come back. That is the measure of fitness. And I see that as our spiritual fitness too. Saying it's not that we're not going to ever get triggered or ever have some kind of sadness or whatever it is, but it is how quickly do you find your grounding again. And that's what I heard in what you said. It's like, and I see that it's like, I can get completely tripped up, but it is like, can I just stand up and dust myself up and go, oh yeah, that was a complete trip over.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I love this idea of spiritual fitness. I'm definitely going to borrow that, but Deborah, thank you. You know, and like, even we sometimes overlook the power then of action and momentum, right? Because there can be a tendency then to want to sit in I think there's a difference between sitting with the discomfort and sitting in it. So to sit in it, by that I mean to collapse into it, where that's overpowering, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about staying with it and allowing something to come through that's available to do as a consequence, right? And so I'll give loads of examples from last week, and I'm sure there's loads from this week too. I just haven't got to them yet. But there was a moment where I realized, of sitting here on, I don't know what it might have been last Tuesday, and I realized that I had greeted two people at breakfast very warmly because I knew them and they had been at the conference, and I was glad to see them before they left. But actually I hadn't greeted a third person who was at the table, because he registered for me as not being, part of the conference. And I told myself, well, I don't want to bother him, they're at breakfast, and, time is precious at breakfast time. And I sat in my table with my two colleagues, and something of it just niggled at me. I could easily have ignored it, actually. And last Tuesday, I'm sitting here going, I actually ignored that man at the table. I went over, I greeted two people warmly. Now, I was one of many. And actually, I don't do that. I don't ignore people. I don't create myself as a person who ignores others. I create myself as an inclusive person, right? So I wrote a Facebook message to one of the people at the table and I said, I have something on my mind I want to clean up. We talk about cleaning up, right? I have something on my mind I want to clean up. You graciously got up from your table to greet a number of us the other morning. And I did not create myself powerfully to one of the people in your company. And would you mind to pass on a message that I'm really sorry for that? I was caught up in a moment, was one of many, but actually that's not how I create myself. So the action that came to me, Deborah, right, from sitting, it was a niggle, as I say, could easily just have, it didn't even register on my Richter scale of emotions, right? It just didn't even get there. But as I was kind of, rewinding through my day, maybe Monday night, processing, I suppose, maybe in my dream time, this was really present for me here. And so I sent the message and I got a message back saying, I didn't even realize that had happened. But actually, this is the person's name. And if you want to reach out, like, by all means, we're all in the business of cleaning up all of the time.
Yeah.
And I reached out to that man and I said to him, look, I did not create myself powerfully. And I apologize that at a table of 3, I greeted 2 and not 3. And I thanked him for who he was being, for the people he was with. Because that's the action that came available to me. Because I wasn't in a spiral of, oh, I should have done that and that makes me a bad person and and all these other times, oh, no, right? We can easily go down, almost, if you picture that's a junction and there's a path to the left, which is of severe judgment and inaction. And there's a path to the right that opens up, that goes, okay, now that you know that, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to say about this? What's the action that I want to take? That relates to how I create myself. Because I just forgot in a moment of enthusiasm on a Monday morning, I simply forgot.
There is such power in that. There is such power in that. And I think, yeah, it is so easy to fall into self-judgment and berating ourselves, whereas there was so much to unpack in what you said there. First of all, there is the leaning into our own intuition and our nudges and our knowing. And from your story and my story too, what I can see is we get into those, we have burnout, we have abusive relationships when we continually override our own nudges, our own inner knowing, our own gut feelings, whatever. We continually we don't listen to those subtleties that you heard in that moment. And then when something does hit, we judge and criticize ourselves harshly. And that was my way of being in the world for so long. It was just like totally ignore anything, my body, my mind, all of it, and just get on, like this, not listening, not doing this. And then coming to a place of being, I mean, I call it God-led and, intuition, following those intuitive nudges. And the subtlety of those, like when we come to that place, more and more and more, we can feel just those, the subtle ones that just, there's something. And to me, it is, if we are prepared to lean into those, there is such wisdom and gold and amazingness that comes. And to me, those 2 days in Birmingham, there were so many people in that room that were, nobody is saying I'm better than you or any of this. There wasn't a hierarchy in that sense, but it is just like we are all learning to lean into that knowing within us and follow that more and more and more, rather than overriding that, and then harshly judging. And when we harshly judge, it will either be ourselves or someone else. I mean, I've noticed that when I judge myself harshly, I judge others harshly, and then there's a cycle of horrible to me, horrible to them, horrible to me, horrible to them. And yet when we lean into those, it's like, okay, that junction that you described, there was a moment, and this is the opening of possibility. This to me is what these conversations are about. Put this on the table. Just say to someone, there's at that junction, there's something else. It is like, okay, something else is there, is available, and it can be right. Who is it that I want to be, and create ourselves. I remember a moment with my son. He was having some conversations with me. He'd had some, he was not in a great place. He was in a terrible state, and we were having conversations, and his go-to was violence, because that was what he knew. And I was talking to him in a very different way, in very different language, but exactly this kind of, that there is another possibility. And I remember him ringing me one day from work, and he was so excited, and he was like, oh, this guy did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. And he said, and I was going to punch him. And then I was like, you don't have to punch him. And he was like, that's what you've been talking about, isn't it? That's what you've been saying. And just this, in that moment, his go-to, how he would have been, he just saw this, you've got an option. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, that is life-changing. And what you have described, they're such ordinary moments, but when we allow ourselves the space to do that something different,
Yeah,
it is huge.
yeah,
Comes from
it is. Yeah. And I guess kind of that's more of what I'm seeing right now, is actually it's all in the small moments.
Yeah.
And the more we catch, the incidental stuff that doesn't even say this particular exchange that didn't happen it was barely on my radar. Like, it was just at a low level niggle, right? But the more we can create ourselves powerfully in those moments, the bigger moments kind of take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit like back to your spiritual fitness analogy, Deborah. I begin to see these are muscle groups, right? And the conversation that you've had with your son, by the sounds of things, on a frequent basis, right? That was part of his training for the bigger moment, when it could have been so easy for an old pattern to open up one set of choices.
Yeah.
But the training that he's been in under your parenting opened up a very different set of possibilities. And that, I think, that's more available when we have the everyday conversations, when we catch, the moments, I call them, these are the moments that matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's very easy to talk a big game of changing the world and changing other people's lives. So easy, right? But actually, are we willing to change our own life? Are we willing to change our own day? Are we willing to change our own behavior in a moment where there doesn't even appear to be a choice? I think that's where we really, if there's winning to be done, and maybe if it's a surrender to win, maybe that's what it is. It's surrendering to another way of being, of acting, of showing up, of creating, whatever language you want to put on, reacting. I think when we surrender to that moment to moment, the person on the street, person beside us on the bus or the train, then what happens in the big meeting or in the big moment will be much more in flow, because you're in it, you're doing the reps, you're getting fit.
Yeah. It is being prepared to listen to those things, isn't it? Something during that weekend, I had a passing moment with somebody that I barely knew, and I saw a pattern from my past. I saw how I responded as someone that it's like, that is not who I am. It's like, wow, that was interesting. That just an old dynamic. This person just said something and I just came back with a really old dynamic, and it's like, oh my God. And that has been something that has really hit me as well. And it's like that's never happening again. It may, but it's like, right, yeah, I'm clear now that is not who I want to show up as. And that uncovered like whole patterns. I saw, oh my gosh, that has played out through my childhood, it's like, wow, yeah. And now, and like you say, it is those little moments of, that's not what I want anymore. That's not who I want to be. It's not how I want. It's not the legacy I want to leave, of that's who I am. And it is in those moments, it's cleaning up. It's like, yeah, not that anymore. And I think these conversations and looking in this direction and actively being a part of these conversations just opens up more and more. It's like the possibility of that newborn child. There is so much amazing possibility, and then we cover it up with the thoughts that we believe to be true. And it's like, uncovering it, these conversations and and it is a continual cleaning up. It's like when you think about housework or any of the cleaning that we do, it's like, you don't do anything that we do. It's not a once, is it? It's like, oh yeah, clean it again, to keep it that way. And it is, if we are continually doing that, I know, in our kitchen, if every time we make a cup of tea or we wipe round, clean up, put it, if we don't do it and don't do it and don't do it, don't do it, years of that mess. It's like, just a quick wipe will do it now, because you're continually doing it. But it is, it's a way of life, not a once and it's done. The cleaning up.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Yeah, because even as you were going through it, it's a bit like, sometimes we forget to clean under the couch.
Yeah.
And then every so often we go, maybe it's time to move the couch and give it a good, deep clean. I think it's, there will be parts where we will naturally tune into, and then others that are not in our line of sight or vision, and until they are. And so sometimes it might be a light dusting will do, and other times it might be a deeper process, right?
Deep clean.
A deep clean, exactly. But I think regardless of what it is, it's it's like Byron Katie says, it's loving what is. It's having compassion for ourselves, that now that we know this, or now that we've seen this, it's to do the work. It's to, and allow that, and have compassion for the people who are around us. That person that was the mirror in that moment that you saw. Can we have compassion for them, that's their best? Absolutely. That's their best response, based on where they are right now.
And there was something in that analogy of the cleaning. There was something that I saw a while back. I noticed that when I was physically cleaning, I was really, like, my neck and my shoulder, I would clean really tightly. And I really noticed that actually I could allow the cloth, the water, whatever, I could allow the cleaning to happen. I didn't have to have so much of me in that harsh way. And I think that's the same here. It's like, when Byron Katie is talking, it's the compassion to that. To me, it is like there is so much of us done for us when we lean into this power. It's like, oh, okay, I'm prepared to move the sofa and clean under there. And first of all, it feels like, oh, it's going to be too heavy and I can't. And it's going to be but it's like, it turns out it's on wheels and you've got all the cleaning you need.
Very good. I like it. Yeah. I like how you brought this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't, there's not so much on us. And I definitely, for me, I think that was one of the things that it felt like so much had gone wrong in my life, that there was just going to be, this was going to be so hard. And the more that I see is as long as we are prepared to look in that direction, it feels like we just get help from everywhere if we just lean into it.
Lovely. Yeah. Beautiful, Deborah. Yeah.
I have loved our conversation, and I really, really think there is some absolute, there was definitely, for me, there has been some moments in there that have really touched something in me. So thank you so much for your time. And if people do want to know more about you, find out about your work or anything like that, where would be a good place for them to contact you?
Well, firstly, thank you, Deborah, for this. It's been quite a fabulous exploration. The time has just flown by, and thank you for all that you shared of yourself in the discussion. If people would like to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Caroline Hughes. I have a website, www.consciousleaders.ie, and my email address and everything is on the website. So that's www.consciousleaders.ie, or you'll also find me on Facebook.
I'll make sure that information is below this video. So
thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.